So, hello. I hope that the Discord chats on the Thursday night are still continuing with all this, and I hope that the chat is still being enjoyed by everyone, and that's why I did premieres. To cover this period of movement and manoeuvre and all the other things going on. If it proves successful and proves sensible with this 2-month plan of doing this, I will remember it for future, and whenever I am wandering around on a Thursday and can't do my normal lives, I will arrange them for them to be premieres. So, this is an interesting topic. Honestly, of the questions asked, of the 4 of them, the economic impacts of either a failed Washington-London number 1 naval treaty, that was kind of easy for me to do. Congos of Jutland, that's going to be interesting because it's not just the Congos. If the Congos are turning up, then other things are probably turning up as well, and it's working out how those officers interact within the higher command is the troublesome one, and that's why that's number 3. I've got it written already, but I'm certainly nowhere near recording it as I keep rewriting it. And Fisher's Courageous Flying Fish, that's going to be fun. Fisher goes carriers. That's interesting, because there are designs around for carriers. There are designs already around, as including one which has a wonderful arch structure over it. I honestly don't know what he would do, but I have put it together, and I've gone with the idea I think he'd go, the route I think he'd go with. But I am going to be quite honest in that video. I'm going to be admitting this is like a 45% chance he does this, there's a 25% chance he does something else, a 15% chance he does something else completely different, and, well, there's a 10% chance of another thing and about a 5% chance of another thing. It's just fun. It is absolute bedlam. So, that said, why am I saying all this before I begin this one? This was probably the one that threw me the most. It was the one which challenged me the most to think it through, because any scenario which involves the Deutsches Heer losing out to the Kaiserliche Marine, that's a difficult one. That is politically, I would have to say, under all but one path, impossible. And even the one path which is mildly possible, everything has to go right, and everyone has to play their parts right, or there will be serious problems. And I'll get into discussing those problems after the shameless book plug. But there are going to be serious issues. This is not an easy thing to do. This is really not an easy thing to do. The personalities involved, the people involved, it's just not possible to be done under most circumstances, let alone easy thing to do even when it can be done. Saying that, it also presented a problem in that the question is, what would the British response be? And what can Germany actually do? Wilhelm decides to try to outbuild the Royal Navy 1910 to 1914 at any cost. Theoretically, maxing out his infrastructure, he can attempt that. But the problem is, he has a lot less infrastructure in terms of its capability to sustain all that and throughput than the British do. On paper, the infrastructure in terms of shipyards might not be as disparate. But in terms of actual capability to build ships in that volume, it's also going to impact. It's going to have effect. It's going to have on everyone else in the world. So, with that in mind, let's go on. James book plug. Okay, so thank you everyone who likes, shares, and subscribes and support the videos. It's really kind if you do that. It really helps grow the channel. As I say many times, and I'm always going to say, naval history, loving it might not be a communicable disease, but I do my best to make it so. However, I'm also, as the title of the channel suggests, I'm an academic. I'm a university lecturer. And I keep emphasizing this. I like the concept of a pension. And the trouble is, for every academic in the UK, it's the same thing. Promotion is based more often than not, and recruitment is based more often than not on publication, in journal articles and in book form, and how well those journals and books do. And if you want to get a permanent post, even a part-time permanent post, and you want to have eventually that pension, you need to your published works need to be doing well. And so this is why I do a shameless book plug in every video, because it not only does the funding from the book help, well, let's be honest, actually no, I earn more, the money from the channel does more for my research than the book does. Literally, the thing about the book that helps is the publication of it and the purchase of it. The numbers help me with me getting jobs for universities. That's it. So that's why I promote it, because no one else is going to advertise my book. So I will advertise my book at every opportunity I get, and the same with all my other books. Hence the shameless book plug, because it is a shameless book plug. I feel no shame about it, because who else is going to advertise it for me? So, here is a solid fact. Doing this, most circumstances end up with General Oberst Helmuth von Moltke the Younger. That is the nephew of the General Field Marshal the battlecruiser gets named after, and Chief of the German General Staff, Grover Generalstab, from 1906 to 1914, and leader of the Supreme Army Command, Oberst Hirschling, using their tremendous political power to pretty much wipe out the Kaiser and replace him with someone more sensible. They have a huge amount of political power. They have so much political power that, honestly, one of the Royal Navy, part of the reason why the Royal Navy built the Queen Elizabeths, and why originally they were pushing them to not just be bigger guns, but also be faster and all these things than now existing dreadnoughts, was not just the qualitative race with USA, Italy, and Japan. Let's not forget the special guest, Austria-Hungary. But because the bigger, more powerful, faster, more capable ships they made, the more expensive they were. The more expensive they were, the more the cost of dreadnoughts would be pushed to the point at which the Kaiserliche Marine was in a political fight with the Deutsches Heer, which they would lose. That was an entire thing. I've put a video link up above, hopefully if remembered, to the Queen Elizabeth class video. If you want to go watch that after this video is over, you will find that video is pretty much the entire Queen Elizabeth class. A lot of the reason that is around making this confrontation happen, because the Royal Navy knows politically the army will always beat the Navy in Germany. But in this scenario, the Navy has to win. That's a problem. Okay? That's a real problem, because mostly, to work with, I have Kaiser Wilhelm. Who, as smart as he is in some ways, as capable as he is in other ways, is fundamentally a moron when it comes to politics and actually being in charge. He's the definition of, if you praise him, he will think you're great. If you disagree with him, he will think you're evil incarnate. You can't really have a constructive conversation with him. There is literally one person on the entire planet at this point who can have a constructive conversation with him, and that's his brother, Grand Admiral Prince Henry Albert Wilhelm Heinrich of Prussia. Grand Admiral, Grof Admiral. And even he can only push it so far. Now, the thing is, If you make this a political fight between the army and the army will wage it and win. So you have to make it a political fight between the army and not the Kaiser's advisors, because that will be their argument. They'll neuter the Kaiser by claiming they are doing the things against his advisors because he's getting poor advice. That old chestnut for how you deal with a monarch who's annoying you. It's not him I'm rebelling against, it's his advisors. He's being given the wrong information, he's being informed wrong. You have to make it so that arguing with this plan is going to be a direct confrontation with the royal family. You have to make it so. Now, believe it or not, I did toy at several points with Kaiser Wilhelm becoming the direct head of the Kaiserliche Marine himself, going that route, and I toyed with it for about 5 seconds, then I remembered his attention span, and then I remembered his actual aversion to actually doing the work of being emperor, or Kaiser. So I doubt that's going to happen. In which case, I do have another choice, don't I? Because, while thinking about all this, I thought, okay, so let's say the Kaiser wants to push this. And whilst Tirpitz will want leadership for himself, that will automatically lead to it being a confrontation between the Navy and the Army, and Tirpitz will lose. As good as at politics as he is, Tirpitz will lose. So to make this work as an actual possibility, there is one scenario. One sliver of a scenario, and I mean absolute sliver. For all those people who are writing in the comment section right now on the chat, this can never happen, this will never happen, I agree with you. But there is one small chance. One small chance. But this also changes things quite dramatically. And that is if we make some changes. Now, historically, the German Imperial Naval High Command, the Kaiserliche Oberkommando der Marine, is got rid of in favour of the German Imperial Naval of the Reichsmarine under Tirpitz, and the Admiralstab, which is the German Imperial Admiralty Staff. There's also this lovely organisation called the German Imperial Naval Cabinet, which you're going to need to have around, and honestly I've left Muller in because he's actually good at the politics. Now, historically, Inspector General of the Royal Navy is a separate one, and in this post, as well as soon-to-be Commander of the Forces in the Baltic, is Prince Henry of Prussia. Historically, he does that role 1909 to 1918, and he is very good in that role. He spends a lot of time, he works closer with Holzendorf, and certainly agrees with him far more than he does with Tirpitz in many of his approaches to things. But he is very good at his role. And historically you have this list of officers who are the Chief of the General Imperial Admiralty Staff. There you go, you got Fischel, Harrigan, von Paul, Bachmann, and Henning von Holzendorf. To make this work, we need to make it so that the Kaiserliche Marine is directly a representative of the royal family. And for that, you have to reverse the loss of the German Imperial Naval High Command. And you have to appoint Prince Henry of Prussia to its post, combining the roles of the German Imperial Admiralty Staff and the Imperial Naval Office into that role. Now, the thing is, you can't get rid of Tirpitz, because politically he's too useful, but he also can't be in a position in that command structure with Prince Henry, because everyone will argue he's using Prince Henry as his cover, and whilst in most scenarios you probably would see that happen, and that's why this would then fall apart, because the army would rebel against it, I have been asked by this scenario of what happens if this happens, so I have to come up with a way of making it work. And the only way I can make it work is if we can limit Tirpitz off and make him Inspector General of the Navy. So basically, him and the Prince swap roles. Also, Fischel then becomes his deputy. Then becomes a deputy. So we then go with these officers now will be the succession of deputies to the Prince Henry of Prussia, who will be the chief of the Kaiserliche Oberkommando der Marine. The COM, as I'm calling it. This is the only scenario I see this working. The only scenario I see this having a chance of working is this one. I would love to chuck out other scenarios, and if you can see other scenarios where this might work, please do put them in the comments and suggest them. But I have spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks since this got set working through this idea, and as we all know, I'm a functioning insomniac. I have a lot of time to set thinking, and I have been reading my books on the German Navy and the German political scenario in this period over and over and over again. And I can honestly not see a way which doesn't involve Henry of Prussia taking that role. I did consider him taking this role. I consider him taking this role. Neither of them give him enough power. He has to have the combined power. So he has to be therefore seen as the supreme representative of the Navy. He has to be seen as the equivalent of Helmuth von Moltke. Because it's going to have to be negotiations between those two. It's going to have to be a scenario where von Moltke is having to deal with his peer as his equal in power and capabilities, being his prince, a prince of the realm, and as high up as you can get. Someone who can say, I am speaking as the Kaiser's representative, and you can trust this because I'm his brother. His younger brother. But the next eldest. It's the only option. Truly. The only one which works. And that then leads us into a whole other pickle, because then we consider the yards historically used to construct major ships for Jutland. And I had fun working through this list, thinking about this, because Britain has 37 ships built by 11 yards over 10 years. Average roughly 3.7 ships per year. Vickers and Barrow in Furness, Palmer's, Yarrow, Majesty Dockyard Devonport, HM Dockyard Portsmouth, Beardmore, Fairfield, John Brown, Armstrong Whitworth, Scott's Shipbuilding Engineering Company, Greenock, Camel Airs, Birkenhead and Thames Ironworks, London. And honestly, there's another couple of yards I could put on there as could have been potentially upgraded to this. And under any scenario like this, I would expect to see that. The Germans had 27 ships built by 10 yards over 13 years in terms of their capital ships at Jutland. Pre-dreadnoughts, if we leave out the pre-dreadnoughts, so it's 21 ships built by 10 yards over 8 years for an average of 2.625 ships per year. This is what they historically manage. Kaiserliche Werft Kiel, Kaiserliche Werft Wilhelmshaven, AG Vulcan, Holzwerk Kiel, Germania Werft Kiel, Schischalwerk Danzig, AG Weser, Holzwerk Werft Kiel, and AG Vulcan, Stettin and Blomvost Hamburg. Now, I would say What's the thing that's limiting the Germans? And what's the thing that's limiting the Britain? Again, it's the infrastructure behind it. It's their production of armour plate, and it's how much they're willing to spend. Britain has a lot more infrastructure behind it. They can produce a lot more armour plate than Germany for ships. Okay, once you're talking about quantity of armour for ships and ship-grade armour in ship-level thicknesses, the British can outproduce Germany. They have a lot more yards and a lot more infrastructure producers of it. They have a lot more competition in the market to max out. There's also other things to do with this which are limiting German production. And if you're noticing these slides, you're thinking you've seen them before. Yes, I've ripped them straight out of my Jutland video, building the fleets for Jutland, because it's pertinent. So if I want to build to match the British, I have to be at least getting 3.7 a year. So I have to up my average of ship construction by a whole ship per year, at least. And they're probably going to up their production level. So where am I going to go? What's my maximum? What's the maximum I've achieved? Well, this is when we get into this one. And this shows some of my working. Because I always believe in showing some of my mathematical working. Now, if we adjust for the 7 missing British Dreadnought-style vessels, but still ignore the missing pre-Dreadnoughts, Ramillies, Renown, Repulse, Glorious, Courageous, and Furious, we get 44 over 12, 11 of 0.333. Average production per yard per year. German average production per yard goes to 0.29 or 2875. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give them the 0.29. So then that means that per yard I have to up it by 0.04. So that means I have to up the rate of production, which means I have to up the infrastructure behind them as well, don't I? The trouble is, the stats tell you nothing really, because, as said, some yards produce a lot of ships and some only one before going bankrupt. So this is entirely theoretical production. For example, Thames Iron Works. They produce an Orion class, then they don't get any orders for anything ships afterwards, and they go bankrupt. They could have built more. There are lots of yards in the UK which produce only one ship, and others which produce multiple ships, sometimes at the same time. So again, maxing out production becomes an interesting question. How do we, where do we, what do we max out production with? And this is where we get to the next discussion. Historic constructions. Oy vey, this is a lot of maths. And trust me, it gets worse. But this is not going to be the longest of these videos, I will admit now. But in terms of numbers of slides, there is a lot of discussion we get to at a certain point. A lot of discussion. But at the moment we have to get through the data first, before we can really have that discussion. So what is the maths going on here? What is the actual stats telling us? What is this all about? Well, this is where we start to look at the brass tacks of what's actually being built. And you have to remember, in both scenarios, the British are building to match the Germans, to have maintain their superiority over Germans, not to the maximum of their ability. The Kaiserliche Marine are building to the maximum of their political economic ability. So they are limited by the capabilities they have been given. Now, They therefore produce the most ships they can, infrastructure-wise, earliest on, when they are the cheapest. The British produce the most ships they can, infrastructure-wise, when they are responding to what they perceive to be the greatest period of threat, or, conversely, when they are wishing to compound an advantage. If we consider that, the Germans' high point in terms of construction of ships being laid down on slipways, which is the biggest limiting factor for them, is 5. Achieved in 1908. 3 battleships laid down, 2 battle cruisers laid down. At no point do they go higher than that. Please go check the stats. Now, yes, there are some overlaps of vessels on there, but there's a relationship of the amount of infrastructure, what they can sustain, what they can construct. And you have to bear in mind that a lot of German construction is actually underpinned by foreign procurement. I'll be getting into this more in a bit, but a lot of their construction is supported by foreign procurement of equipment, including stuff from Britain. A lot of stuff from Britain. Britain, conversely, well, in 1911, they lay down 4 ships domestically for themselves as battleships, and 3 cat battleships for other powers, so that's 7. And they lay down 1 battle cruiser for themselves and 1 for other powers, so that takes you up to 9. They also do 9 again in 1913. And they do 7 in 1912. And they are regularly 6 or 7 ships being laid down a year from 1909 onwards. They start off as being roughly usually 4 or 5. 4 in 1906, 1 in 1905, but there's also the 2 Lord Nelsons and other ships being done at that time. You have to remember some of the armoured cruisers are quite big and they take up space as well. And then there's 5 next year, including 2 for foreign powers. So, the British, you could say, would not be straining their yards' construction capacity if they can build 9 a year. They can probably build more. Honestly, again, we go back to the yard numbers, we go up to them, and we are looking at the British with their yards. They have 11 yards. Theoretically, they could be laying down 11 in a year. They have the infrastructure more than 11, because let's be honest, some of those yards can handle multiple constructions at the same time. But there again, there might be some overlap. But again, if they're prepared to push their infrastructure, and if they're prepared to restrict what they're supplying to other people abroad because of that, there could be some interesting movements here. Theoretically, therefore, I should say the same for the Germans. I should say, well, they could be pushing down 10. But the trouble is, some of those yards can build the smaller battleships. They can't build a larger one, so it'll take infrastructure investment for them to be able to maintain. Because you can't just maintain construction of battleships. Remember the question. William decides to try to outbuild the Royal Navy at any cost in 1910 and 1904. That means it has to get involved in the qualitative race from the get-go. And that's where some real problems start to arise. Because now we have to get into the other big problem. This is something I talked about a lot in the Jutland video. The fleets at Jutland are incredibly imbalanced. Yes, this actually makes what the High Seas Fleet does, even though they do not win. They don't win Jutland. They do kill more capital ships. I will give them that, but winning fleets don't run away from the battle afterwards. They have, how do I put this, scratched the bear, but they haven't killed it, and they haven't won the fight against it. They've singed its tail, but it's coming at them hard. And they're sensible to a draw. But you start to look at things. The British bring 28 dreadnought battleships to the fight. That's more than the Germans bring in total capital ships there. Even when you include the pre-dreadnoughts, the Sovereign-style battleships, they have only got 27 ships there of those. The British have got 37. Including battlecruisers, which is another reason why the British should not have had the battlecruisers and like the Invincible class anywhere near the battle line, because they have overwhelming superiority in numbers. Those ships should have been kept back from the battle line, and if anything, allowed to scoot round to try and cause trouble for the German forces from other actions, but not try and join in the battle line. Let the battle line engage the German, the High Seas Fleet, and let ships like that do a guerrilla action from other angles to distract them and make their life complicated. British have brought armoured cruisers to the battle as extra forces against the German light forces. Poorly used, but they were actually ultimately useful addition in that role. But then we consider things like light cruisers, and this is when you start to have a telling discussion. The Germans have brought all their dreadnoughts. The British HMS Dreadnought's not there. Dreadnought is not there herself. She's not at Jutland. She's off doing other duties. She's in the Channel Fleet. And the British don't even have all their battle cruisers there. They don't have all their ships there. By a long way. But when you start to look down, the British have brought light cruisers, a lot of them, and none of them had launched earlier than 1908. 5 of the German vessels had. 16 of British ships were 1913 or later, only 5 of the Germans were. So the British have brought 26 ships, of which 16 are launched 1913, 14, 15, 16. The Germans only have 5 vessels of their 11. So whereas the vast majority of the British light cruisers are new construction, that they've been constructing as well as producing all those capital ships, the vast majority of, well, the majority of the Germans, and this is they brought their cream and their crop with them, their cruisers, aren't. The British have 78 torpedo boat destroyers there. The Germans have 61 torpedo boats. Now, honestly, the older, smaller ones are definitely torpedo boats. But some of the newer, younger ones, people want to go, well, they're equivalent to British destroyers. They are, but they're not the majority. Not there. So basically, already, to build the capital ships they did build, to build the dreadnoughts, to build the battle cruisers they did build, they had to mortgage their navy's construction of cruisers and torpedo boats, not destroyers, not torpedo boat destroyers, torpedo boats, in order to do it. The British didn't have to. So the British were able to max out Build 9, etc. In the same year, they were laying down and launching cruisers, destroyers, by the dozen. Okay, so you want me to match? The plan of the man is to try and match British construction. I can't just match their warships in terms of their capital ships. I have to match their fleet. I have to try and match it all. And that puts me at an even bigger trouble with my infrastructure. Because this is what I have to produce warships. I have a couple of small yards extra on top of that, but not much. These are the biggest yards the British have to produce your warships. But their entire ship names not here. JS Whites of Cows, all sorts of yards that specialise in destroyer production, in small ship construction, are not here. And that's before we get on to the fact that you've got things like Cockatoo Island, etc. in Cockatoo Island? Garden Island, and Cockatoo. I think Cockatoo as well. And all those things in Australia and Canada and other yards that Britain can go to by getting the Royal Australian Navy to order them and the Royal Canadian Navy. So Britain's not ordering ships abroad, but their empire is. And that's also how Britain can spread the cost around. Britain's not paying for this ship. Canada is. Australia is. New Zealand is. Because they have to. India is. So Germany's in real trouble at this point. So what kind of program does it nail me in? Let's consider the stats before we get into this. So all of this I have had to work through. What are the stats? What's the scenario? What gets me through to that? Well, the RN can lay down 9+ capital ships a year with yard space. Historically, the Kaiserliche Marine can lay down 5. Why does the Kriegsmarine and the Kaiserliche Marine both be KM? Doesn't help a dyslexic. With all this, I think the problem for the Germans in this scenario is going to become one of investment. They might choose to do this in 1910. But they're going to have to massively invest in their yards 1910, 1911, 1912 to even have a chance of starting to match the British. They're not just going to be building ships in those years. In those years, they're probably going to still be limited to about 5 ships. Because they're going to have to put all the funding into investing and growing their yards. And the thing is, that's going to be seen coming a mile off. Growing the yard capacity is like building the Kiel Canal. It's a flashing red warning sign for the British to spot. So, realistically, the Germans either don't invest in the yards, just build capital ships, and don't have anything else. Which, honestly, Prince Henry's not going to do. He's far too sensible naval officer. He's far too capable naval officer for him to do that. He's going to push for a balanced fleet. Not like Tirpitz, who basically is like other great visionaries in the period. The moment their vision is punctured, oscillates wildly from one hellscape to another. If that's the scenario, and if that's what we're dealing with, you have either a scenario, therefore, where the Germans try and leap in to construction and can quickly be overmatched because the British are not just building more capital ships than them, but are building all the other things as well. Because the Germans are building 9 capital ships, trying to match that a year. The British will A, build more, and B, the British will keep building cruisers and destroyers. And when you eventually have that battle, if it does take place, then the German fleet is going to be a very solid core with nothing around it. That sounds like a good way to commit suicide. From a naval perspective, as a warship, as a fleet. It's not an imagery which I'm particularly happy about using, but that is pretty much what you're talking about. Because, as I'm always rabbiting on about on this channel, what you need to fight a battle, what you fight a battle with, is not individual ships. It's the cumulative value of the task group. It's a task force. It's the cumulative capability of the force you have. So, let's say they go full out. They go all in. If they lay down 5 capital ships every year from 1910 onwards, they can get 37. And the reason I'm going with 5 is because A, infrastructure build up, and B, then they can also start building up their cruisers and torpedo boat destroyers. That's based on 12 already laid down and 2 years to go from laying down to commission. Roughly 2 to 3 years. In service by Jutland's historic time in 1916. To do that, they're also going to have to curtail any prestige merchant ship construction. So basically, the entire liner race they have with Britain for the Blue Ribbon Prize, they have with Britain and America, is gone. German entries to that are over. There is no way you can do that and build these ships. The RN, if they respond, with even 9 a year in comparison, and could easily go 10 or more, as some yards can handle more, as mentioned already repeatedly, that would be 62 capital ships. The RN are likely to max out their infrastructure, so for example, the shift in 1912 for 15-inch guns, because the qualitative and all these things, and they might actually try and push that earlier. Here's the thing, the British do the historic shift to 13.5-inch guns in 1910. That will be immediately when this is happening. So the British are already building bigger guns, ships, and okay, yes, the Germans respond with 12-inch guns. The British then respond with 15-inch guns. You could actually have the British pushing that in response to German construction going up so dramatically. The investment in gun research could be also increased dramatically by the British. And that 15-inch 42 might be a 15-inch 45. Which has interesting impacts on things, because those extra 45 inches of barrel length... 45 inches of barrel length extra, that's going to add something. It's going to add a bit to the muzzle velocity. There's also going to be enough construction going through that Jellicoe might well get his have the money, and because he's going to be third Sea Lord for a good chunk of this time period, have the ability to get his modifications and upgrades to the armor testing program and the shell testing program put through. After all, this is going to be a very serious challenge. This is not just they're building they're building these ships, but they are laying down 5 a year, and they are investing in infrastructure to grow that and to grow their ability to build cruisers, etc. Here's where things can get really interesting. Bayern's historically laid down in 1913. That gives them a maximum of 10 15-inch gun ships if they manage to push that whilst maxing out all their production, i.e. cruisers and torpedo boats. But there's a big problem. The Germans are only slowly getting into their own turbine construction. And if we consider that Bayern and Baden have Parsons turbines, which were procured before war started, so did Koenig and Crown Prince. if the British are ordering that many more turbines for their ships, they could well quietly tell Parsons, and Parsons and others could quietly tell all sorts of people that the Germans don't get any turbines. Now, the thing is, the Germans can increase turbine construction, but the main problem they had with their early turbines was reliability versus Parsons turbines, which is one of the reasons why they're buying them. Remember, they're choosing to buy them from Britain. That's because the British turbines are reliable, work well, not just in terms of reliability, but provide a decent return of horsepower for their size and for the amount of steam you're putting in. And they can't actually produce that many of battleship grade size turbines at the time. Now, this could force all sorts of things. It might force a diesel Kaiserliche Marine. It might force them to keep with triple expansion engines. It might completely cripple and slow down their construction for a couple of years because they can't get enough turbines. Or the turbines they get might be terrible for the first couple of years, so that could wipe out a dozen or so of their capital ships in any real addition. This is a true problem they're going to have to face. And it's something the British can chuck their way quite easily. So, the question is, as I've said earlier, issues for Germany and the British response. What happens? What happens? Well, now you're going to have a classic discussion of me with just one slide up here, because it's going to be the summary slide. Because from next point on, we're entirely in the world of my logic, based on all this information I have laid out. And more, which I will bring in and discuss, but I felt that this all the information I've laid out was important enough it needed an actual slide to give you the information. So I hope the chat's enjoying this. I hope you're going to be on Discord later, and I hope I've managed to attend either the chat or Discord so I can hear what you thought and see comments below. Because here's the summary, and it is a picture of the Grand Fleet at the Firth of Forth. Hey, caramba. So now I've recharged my own brew. Let's think about it. With it passed from Tirpitz, who was, I've always said, far more obsessed with matching the British in terms of their ship construction than he should have been, to certainly a Prince Heinrich led vision of the Kaiserliche Marine, probably involving people like Holzendorf, and more than likely involving Fischel as well. I think you could have an interesting scenario here. I think the ships the Germans are building change. The idea of building necessarily battle cruisers might fall out. I think they might decide that actually the easiest route for them to go, especially if they're investing in turbines, and diesels, is to go for a diesel turbine hybrid. Let me explain. I think what you could see is them adopting diesel engines to give their capital ships range, and diesel fuel because that's a better scenario than coal for them. Their diesel fuel production in this era is not as extensive as it will be, but again, that can be part of your investment in infrastructure. It's a well-known process, and it's something which you can take particularly low-grade supplies of fuel and make something useful of them. Yes, you have to do some fractional distillation. Yes, that's not exactly the easiest or nicest thing to do in the world, but it's viable, and the process is well understood even at this point, thanks to Diesel himself. I think also you have to consider that they would maybe put a turbine in and have a conventional, even a coal oil turbine. Maybe it's an oil fired turbine. I don't think they get to necessarily oil fired turbines any earlier than they did historically because of their ability to get even good quality ship oil. But there again, they have terrible coal. And I don't see this affecting the first couple of generations of those ships. But they could well have a turbine system so that can provide them with the speed. Why am I saying speed? Well, here's the thing. I think you have to go for a four-shaft capital ship to suit the German fleet. You would have two shafts. The outer ones run on diesels. They would be what would keep you going most of the time. And then when you want really high speed, you power up the turbines. And you shift. And why am I saying that? Because I think to try and get into the qualitative race, they need to come up with something which is going to set them apart and to match the British. They do not have the same amount of infrastructure as the British do for armaments. The one scenario they can throw in to make things more expensive for the British, therefore, because the British have a massive armaments industry at this point, we're talking 3 of the world's 5 largest are British in terms of arms manufacturers. Yes, Krupp is German. Yes, Skoda, and their group is Austro-Hungarian. And yes, once you're in the top 10, you've got another Austro-Hungarian firm very high up there. You've got another German firm high up there. You've got an American firm, and then you've got another couple of British firms. And you've got some Swiss firms, Swedish firms, etc. And I'm not talking in terms of quality of production output, please. No, I'm not. I realise others are producing very good stuff. I'm talking quantity. Able to produce sheer quantity of guns large enough for a capital ship. There aren't many firms. The fact that the British have quite so many of those big firms is testimony to the sheer number of ships they've been ordering and building over the years for not just themselves but other people, and how many people they've been sending their guns to. I think the Germans push for a fast battleship idea, but I don't think they're going to go for a 28-knot ship, because they can't get to that with the scenario they have. But I think there's a reason their battle cruisers, which, let's be honest, are heading towards the fast battleship concept, but are actually too slow for that, are heading for 26.5 knots. Because that's the sweet spot at which they can armour a ship well enough for them to be happy with it being a fighting line. Because let's be honest, their battle cruisers are always more intended to be in a fighting line than the British ones are. And it still be fast enough, it's got a commanding speed advantage over capital ships. And that would be a direct problem for the British to face, because the British would have to then work that into their own construction. Now, they can do that. They can do that. But the British are building a lot more than the Germans are. And the one pinch point the British might have, potentially, and this is very potentially, is boiler production of high-pressure boilers. It's why it's one of the really long lead items alongside turrets. And if you want high speed, you need high-spec boilers. And let's be honest, there's a reason why Jellicoe has to settle for 25, aiming for 25 knots and falling short for the Queen Elizabeth class. Because he's told the small tube boilers won't work. Now, under this scenario, if the Germans are pushing for speed, and British intelligence will pick that up really quickly, because the British have a very strong intelligence network in Germany. The British likely respond by going with the small tube boilers. And honestly, with the extra construction that's been ordered since 1910, they might well have the yards already pushed forward for that. The yards might already be there. I definitely think Vickers will be. They were already pushing down the small tube boiler route. John Brown, they're the other turbine manufacturer, and they also like small tube boilers. They're also pushing on that route. So you've got Parsons, John Brown. Yes, there are some difficulties, but you can push it. If the Germans are going fast battleship route, that then presents a problem for the British. You see, battle cruisers suit defense of the Empire and commerce protection. But they need to think about fighting in the North Sea. So they might well push for the fast battleship route themselves, but they're going to be trying to go for 28-knot ships. Which means their ships are going to need to be bigger. Trouble is, 28 knots is not a commanding speed advantage over a 26.5-knot ship. You need 3 knots to maintain a ranging advantage over and dictate range to another ship. 3 knots. Actually, it works out at 2 point... Oh, I did the maths years ago to check it, and I think it was 2.69 something. And yeah, everyone rounds it up to 3 knots because, let's be honest, weather conditions can sooner aid even that. So yeah, 3 knots. That's going to require a lot of power. I think you also have a scenario where the British have a cruiser race going on. And this is where things become interesting, because if you're not building battle cruisers, if you're trying to build fast battleships to outpace the German fast battleships and outfight them with 15-inch guns and 20 knots of speed, you're still going to need to cover the Empire. And I think the British response is going to be some heavy cruisers. Something that's going to be the successor to the armoured cruiser. A true dreadnought armoured cruiser, if you would have. And let's be honest, there has been some ships like that already. As I've said before, the dreadnought hull design does not come from nowhere. As, you know, if you want to go look them up, the Duke of Edinburgh class armoured cruisers, which are designed and laid down 1903 and launched in 1904. Very, very interesting when you compare them to a dreadnought layout. You can go the same with the Warrior class to an extent, and the Devonshire class. There is a lot of ideas going on here already about ship structure and shaping. So, I would expect the British to lay down some sort of heavy cruiser. Some sort of new, as I said, true dreadnought armoured cruiser. Maybe at this point, Beluga gets sisters. I don't know. I don't think German production can deal with a large heavy cruiser production line at the same time as producing these ships. I think what they will be seeking, if they're trying to seek cruiser balance, is a light cruiser design they can churn out easily. And a larger destroyer design, a larger torpedo boat design they can churn out in great numbers. And they're going to have to build yards that can allow them to do both, whilst concentrating their existing yards on capital ships construction, because if they don't, they're in trouble. If they don't, they are in severe trouble. And at that point, you'd have to ask yourself, why would they do that to themselves? Why would they put themselves in that scenario? And they have got to max this all out, whilst also keeping the army, relatively speaking, on side. So the only way this works is if you're also spending money like crazy on the army, and as said, you've got the person doing the education is a prince arguing with von Moltke. Now, he might also require some buying off. And what do I mean by buying off? I mean quite literally that. He's going to have to be bribed in some way. I think he's going to have to be given awards. I think he's going to have to be given greater status and nobility. And I think you're going to have to do that with a lot of generals. I think fundamentally you're going to have to get more people in Germany to buy into the idea that Tirpitz has been presenting for years, that Britain is the existential enemy of Germany. That's how he justified the construction he did. That's what his papers basically say. The only reason to build that fleet is if you treat Britain as an enemy, and Britain had been their traditional ally. So, from this point, what really realistically happens? Does Germany go bankrupt in this period? No, they're one of the richest economies. But their economy is going to be shifting heavily to war footing. I mean, they are shifting themselves pretty much to war footing to build it. So, large merchant ship construction is going to have to cease because, well, for starters, all the engine manufacturers are going to be concentrating on engines for the Navy. And the yard space is not going to be much there if you're going to try and build cruisers. Britain's response is going to be outbuild it. Whatever Germany tries to build, Britain's got the infrastructure ready to build it. If Germany's upgrading their infrastructure, Britain will be both building more ships while they're doing it and upgrading their infrastructure. Because for Britain, a navy represents an existential crisis. An existential need. The very survival of Britain as a nation, let alone its empire, depends on their navy in this period. That's their mindset. So everything Germany's prepared to spend, everything the Kaiser's prepared to spend, is naught compared to what the British are prepared to spend. And that's your fundamental issue. If you're Germany. Your fundamental issue is this. You cannot outspend the British because the British will not be outspent. Whatever you build, they will build twice. The really worrying impact for everyone is going to be what everyone else does. Do I think America starts doing a massive build-up because the British are doing it? No. Do I think the French do a massive build-up? Potentially, they start trying to build more ships, yes. Italians will probably respond to that. Austrians, who knows? They're not going to give a blank check to the Navy like the Germans do, but they might well build more. The Russians historically buy ships from the Germans. That's where some of their modern cruisers actually come. This is the joke. Some of their modern cruisers at Jutland, which I just mentioned, they're not even ordered by the the Kaiserliche Marine, the Imperial Navy. They're ordered by the Russians. By a different Imperial Navy. There's also going to be an interesting impact because if you've got this going on, the British probably don't have the capability, potentially they do, of building some of the ships they historically do for their allies. If they do it, because those are going to historically 1911, 1913. If they do it, then they're even more maxing out their production. Could they do it? Seriously, British infrastructure in this period is hard to really fathom the sheer quantity they have. If they're investing in an infrastructure at the same time to match the Germans and trying to grow their infrastructure whilst also utilising it, which they have sufficient margin they could do, they could. But that then does push the Americans to do something, because that could mean the South American nations get some doozies of capital ships. Absolute doozies ordered. I think the interesting thing will be to see how quickly the British do go to the 15-inch gun. As said, they start the 13.5-inch gun fairly early. Pretty much that program started is going into 1910s. Is 1910. But if the Germans are pushing their production up this early, I could see the 15-inch program. I could see the fast capital ship program being earlier than 1912, maybe even. I could see it being earlier. And the Germans will find themselves in a race because they'll have to match those 15-inch guns. While they're doing all the investment, all the construction, they're going to have to find the funds for that, and it's just... it is going to wreck all their spending. They're going to have to hike taxes, borrow money, all sorts of things to try and build their industry, their maritime industry, up to the level at which they can do this. And even then, the amount it will cost them to do it versus the cost for Britain to increase theirs enough that the Germans cannot match it quickly in time is a quantum realm of difference, because the British are building from a larger base to begin with. So the Germans you're talking about doubling capacity in most things. For the British, you're talking about maybe increasing the capacity by 25-30%. That is a whole world of difference in cost scenarios. And as said, the British can spread the cost. Not necessarily forever. Not without any political consequences. Everything will have a political push and minus. But, and I did say political push and a minus, everything you do requires a political push to do it. And there are going to be negatives for that. The positive is you have the ships. But it's going to require political capital you could have spent on something else being used for the ships. And getting those ships is going to have positive for you in having those ships, but there will be a negative as well consequence of having those ships. Of that scenario, there will be people you have upset, displeased, displaced because of it. Realistically, do I think this stops World War One? Look, I'd say in most scenarios where this is attempted by the Kaiser, he tries to put Tirpitz in charge, and he ends up with a minor civil war where the army arrests Tirpitz on some trumped-up charges, and he finds himself sacrificing Tirpitz to save his throne, on the advice of Prince Heinrich. I would say 99 times out of 100, that's what would happen. That's the path he'd go if he was attempting it. This is like a 1 in 100,000 chance he goes this route, and then it's about a 1 in a million chance it works. And even then, Germany can't do it. You see, if we go back to the average ship construction, yeah, it's a whole ship a year. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is those maximums. And the British are starting from a baseline of being able to churn out 9 and lay down 9 in a year quite happily. The Germans are starting from a baseline of being able to lay down 5. The British are laying down almost double the number of vessels the Germans are, and they aren't even stretching a sinew to do so. It's politically interesting because the politicians would prefer not to spend. They want to have a navy which is second to none and is the greatest in the world, but they don't want to always spend not all the politicians want to spend all the money necessary for that. They never do, even in Britain. They just get beaten regularly by the people who are going, but it's for empire! Defence of Britain, the island fortress, the nation, the hub of the world. We need the navy to police the world and maintain our status. So it's going to be fun. It is going to be fun. You see, in this scenario, I could see war maybe not breaking out in 1914 because they're so wrapped up in the shipbuilding they won't even notice the Archduke getting assassinated. But I could also see Britain laying down 15-inch gunships in 1912 and 16.5-inch gunships, if not 18-inch gunships in 1914. The original HMS Agincourt notwithstanding, my opinions on her, the 6th Queen Elizabeth class vessel, notwithstanding, I would have, and there's videos about that on this channel. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please look them up. My opinions on all that notwithstanding, I think there is going to be a jump. They might stick with a 1.5-inch jump due to the sheer volume of production going through. I wouldn't be surprised if very quickly the Germans find the British ordering an entire battleship squadron a year. That's 8 battleships and a couple of battle cruisers. Once they realise the Germans are going for fast battleships rather than battle cruisers, they might maintain the battle cruiser construction, but they're going to want fast battleships themselves. They were heading in that direction anyway, the Queen Elizabeth class. So they probably do that. And as I said, I think they produce a heavy cruiser with a 9.2-inch gun. I didn't add the 9.2-inch gun earlier, but I really do think it's a dreadnought armoured cruiser with a 9.2-inch gun. Because they have those ready to go. They have those guns. They have turrets designed for that ready to go. They can produce a design. and that will take on a large chunk of the cruising role, the cruising portion of the battlecruiser role, with the fast battleships being kitted out to take on some of the other portion of the cruising role, of the battlecruiser role. Instead of a fast wing, you have a fast fleet. And as said, I'm fairly certain the British aim for 28 knots. Small tube boilers will get them there. They'll actually need to have more. The other scenario you're going to have to face is, do the Germans try to go for a triple turret? Do the British go for a triple turret to provide superiority? The British, we know, are testing triple turrets in the Vickers and other photos. Again, I've discussed this as a scenario. The Germans look at the Austrian triple turret, decide they don't want to go that route. But if the Germans are really pushing things, the British decide to push things more. And they're going to need to have a beamier and longer hull, therefore, anyway, to try and get 28 knots. That's the main problem with the Queen Elizabeth. They're big, but they don't have enough space for enough boilers to get them to 28 knots. Even if you're going to small tube boilers available time, you're going to need to have more space to be able to get to 28 knots to have enough boilers, enough boiler capacity. More length, slightly more beam to have breadth across them for them. That scenario gives you more space. Do you go with a triple turret as another way to try and secure a victory? Do you go for a 28 knot, 12, 15 inch, 45 Queen Elizabeth class? That's pushing things, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities for the British. The main thing is you would have in this scenario is there'll be no chance of dropping off the accelerator when you get to the R class. They will have to be successors to the Queen Elizabeths in every single way. And as said, the British, by the time you get to war, the British could have 27 to 30 vessels for Jutland 15-inch guns. And they could all be 28-knot ships. The Germans, in comparison, could have 10 with 26.5 knots. And that's before you add on the complexity of if they decide to go triple turret after the British go triple turret. Everything you add on, every complexity you add on, you have to take more development and infrastructure. And the British have more of that infrastructure and more of the research infrastructure devoted to maritime infrastructure. And anything you do for the Kaiserliche Marine means those are resources, more resources you are taking away from the Deutsche Heer. And will there come a point at which the Deutsche Heer crack and rebel? Again, it's going to be a balancing act the whole way through. I don't think the British do a scenario of launching a surprise attack or a preemptive strike to try and secure an advantage. I don't think the British go that route. I won't be surprised if there are people calling for it in the UK. There's always going to be hotheads like Fisher and Churchill probably pushing for it, but I doubt anyone will actually do so. And if war does break out as it does historically, it's going to be interesting. The British infrastructure is going to be even greater. Even greater to build on, and then going to a war footing. Has it gone to a war footing by all this construction? I honestly don't think it will, though. I think that's the one advantage the British have. They could keep doing this all, and they haven't had to disrupt the army's growth and the army's armaments. Because they've got enough infrastructure and naval infrastructure to grow from naval infrastructure without disrupting the army side. And I think their yards are big enough, and with investment going in them, which they're most likely to do, they can still do a goodly quota of merchant construction. The interesting thing is if the Blue Ribbon Prize keeps going as a competition between the British and the Americans. It could do. The French occasionally enter it. So ultimately war happens. The German fleet is slightly less imbalanced. It certainly has more dreadnought ships. As I said, I'm fairly sure they'd be fast battleships of a kind. And it will have some light cruisers, probably of a similar design to those which they built for the Russians. They're building probably something like that, but mass produced, a lot more of them produced, and they'd need at least 2 to 3 dozen to stand a chance. But they'd have to build a lot of they'd have to invest a lot in yards to be able to get those, as well as getting the capital ships. So probably in reality, it's going to be more like a dozen or so of them. For everything the Germans build, though, the British will build at least 2. And cruisers, possibly 3 or 4, and an entire new generation of armoured cruiser, or whatever they're going to call it at the point. I think it actually makes the situation worse for Germany. And it also will mean that if war happens, the Navy's going to be under even more of a pressure to do something. Because the Army will have sacrificed things for the Navy to get what it needs. Everyone will have sacrificed things for the Navy to get what it needs to do its job. Honestly, you might even have Prince Heinrich have to go out and take personal command of the fleet himself and go to sea to try and fight the British. And the trouble is, that is a roll of the dice, where the British are going to have a lot more resources. And the earlier in the war it happens, the less likely it is that the Germans have significant submarine construction as well to support them. Because they really do sacrifice pretty much everything to get those capital ships. If it's before the big 15-inch ships have arrived en masse, let's say it's early 1915, it could be a toss-up either way. And when I say either way, that's between an absolute tragic, complete annihilation of the Germans, or a Jutland-style scenario where they score some small victories and then get away quickly. There is no scenario where I see them winning it. There is just none. So there you go. At this point in videos, I normally have a question. And really the appropriate question for this video would be, how do you think the Germans could have done anything with this? But honestly, the answer is, if you want to comment below about that, you're more than welcome to, but I don't see it as a question. What I do see as a question, under this scenario, I've been quite blank about the German cruiser construction. As I said, I think I base it off what they build for the Russians. But I'd like to hear what you think the Germans might try for a cruiser construction. I really do. And whether you think what they could do to really crank out cruisers in numbers. There are options. Modular construction is theorized at this point, but no, it's not theorized in Germany at this point. The discussions are very much in the UK for ships anyway, and in America as well to an extent. Germany is very much bespoke. Perfect. So if you want to introduce that as a culture change, that's another massive step. So I don't think that happens. But I'd still like to hear what you think about their potential cruiser construction could have been. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please do like, share and subscribe. And please, follow the others onto Discord, some of the people on Discord. Hopefully there are some Masters at Arms, as they're called in Discord server, watching currently. We have flotilla leaders and Masters at Arms. Masters at Arms are the people who are in charge of the Discord chats and making sure that everything is respectful and encouraging atmosphere in the chat, in sort of the live chats and the voice chats and discussions. And the flotilla leaders are the server admins. If you like the video, as I said, please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel and the book Habit, which supports all this, well, there's Patreon, where you can also go and suggest topics and questions for me to answer. Very soon, at some point in this month, I'm fairly sure the suggestions will go live for August, and then the vote will go live, and those will be lives, not premieres. Premieres are for when I am traveling or moving house. When I'm dealing with people who are incredibly annoying and incredibly stubborn. My dogs. Have you tried to explain to a corgi that the toys are only going in the box for a couple of days while they're being moved, and he can have his travel toys while you're traveling? Have you tried to explain it to him? Because I have. And he doesn't listen. And then you have a poodle who insists on everywhere he has to go is a fashion show. He's a standard poodle. And he has more sweaters than I do. I have one which was bought for me years ago by someone else. He has a collection of about 10. Half of them he's picked out himself when he goes into the pet shops and goes nozzling up to him and goes, "I'd like this, please." You say, "Pick a toy." He goes and gets a sweater. Sorry. They are fun traveling companions. But no, we have Patreon, we have Ko-fi, there's PayPal, and there's also memberships to the channel. All of them do support this channel and the books and all the research that takes place. So thank you very much. And what coming up next week? Next week we have Damage Control. Hang on. No, no. Carriers of the Warfleet happened the first week. Damage Control happened this week. Oh, next week we have Imperial Japanese Naval Aircraft Squadron System. Why did I put that in there for myself? Why was I that evil to myself? I was truly evil to myself. I apologize now to myself for that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Why would I have that structured for when I'm away? I have to record that before I go and be happy with that, rather than trying to re-record it while travelling. Oh, God. Why am I that cruel? Anyway, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'll be fretting about it from now until the 18th of June, but yeah. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and hope you have a nice evening. And hopefully I managed to pop into the chat and say hi, and hopefully I'll be on the Discord server in a bit as well. Say hi.